Grief is not an easy conversation at all, and losing a loved one can't be easy. It doesn't matter who they are. But today in particular, we're speaking about losing a spouse, a life partner, and whether married or unmarried, I think the impact of losing a life partner doesn't get easier. We're still speaking about this with clinical psychologist Julia Mathabathe. Julia, let's talk about that, because the relationship you have with your family, the relationship you have with your friends, with your colleagues, is very different from the relationship that you'd have with your spouse. This is someone that you really intimately build your life with, both in a career sort of trajectory, in a life trajectory, but also in a romantic trajectory. So our spouses tend to be very close to us compared to the other relationships that we have that seem to linger in the periphery.
Yes, that's true. But when you're speaking, I just remembered something just popped up that also we need to, take into account how the partner passed on. As much as we grieve differently, we need to also be cognizant of, people when we lose loved ones, the how part matters the most. Whether was it a sudden death. Was someone sick? Did they have time to sort of say their goodbyes, or was it a bit more complicated in terms of they never got time? So the way we grieve someone mostly will be influenced by, like I said, the relationship that we have. So the closer we are to someone, for instance, if we see someone every day, or we speak to them every day as their partner, as our partners, and then we have plans. We're meeting next week. We're having the bond negotiations next year, or have an anniversary, in 2 months. So when death strikes and all those plans abruptly, they have to stop. The brain also has to now wire itself. When you speak of, the thoughts, the behavior, and the cognition of a human being, that now automatically that psychological triad has to quickly make sense and make meaning out of it. And how do we now move on from that? And most people struggle with that because, remember, with grief, the first reaction psychologically from a human being is either shock or denial, which are primitive and rigid. There's no logic there. It's mostly emotions. So we need to sit with people and allow them time to make sense of that. As much as we know logically that at some point we need to move on, but at that moment when that happens, we need to take it as and how they grieve so that we don't take over. It's their grief, it's their relationship, it's their journey, it's their emotions. So all we can do is just sit and be there.
So, Julia, what are the expected stages of grief after losing this loved one?
Yes. So prior, the research said there were 5, which would be shock or denial. In the first one, there would be bargaining with someone, like trying to understand why me and all of that. So with shock and denial is a thing of, okay, I was with this person now, or maybe a few hours ago, and later on I hear an accident. I get a call that they were in a motor vehicle accident, for instance. So the shock to the body, to the emotions, like literally everything about a human being is trying to make sense of what's just happened. So it's literally shock or denial that, no, it can't be. Like, this person was here. We're supposed to have dinner later, for instance, or we had plans later, Then there's one where the second one would be bargaining, where we're now trying to, for instance, why me? God, if it's a spiritual thing or it's a Christian thing, we'll be like, is God punishing me or whatever? And then there'll be one where we'll say, denial, depression, where all those symptoms now, the struggle of sleep, the appetite loss, energy levels, struggle to focus at work or at school, being withdrawn, just wanting to be alone, tearful all the time, sometimes even feeling suicidal. The last one would be the acceptance stage. I jumped 2, but the last one would be the acceptance stage after going through all those 4 stages of grief. But now, before, research would say they would be like that. It would be anger, it would be denial or shock, there would be bargaining, there would be depression, and there would be acceptance. But now recent research says those steps can happen anytime, so they're not linear. You can go from depression to shock again or denial again, trying to make sense of what just happened. Then tomorrow too, it's a thing of, I'm making sense of this. It's okay. I'm learning how to accept. But the next day you struggle to wake up. So those depressive symptoms are they where you're just tearful, you're suicidal, maybe even substance abuse. So those stages, we are now trying to make sense to our patients that basically just be human and allowed to feel what you're feeling at that time. For as long as there's intervention to a point where there's therapy, if necessary, we need psychiatric intervention for the mood, but we need to take it as and when and how it happens, different individuals.
Yeah. That's so powerful, the fact that you spoke about those different phases. And I think it's going to help us also understand what we are going through and that it's natural to go through those moments. And at times we feel like we are isolated in that moment. We feel like we're the only ones that are feeling that loss. Is it important to gather with other people who are feeling the same way that you are feeling? I'll give you an example. You know, I've got a friend who lost her sister many years ago, and something that they do with the siblings is that they always gather and they talk and celebrate their loved one, but they also grieve. You see them grieving on different stages, whether they put the status and celebration of that person that they've lost, but there's always a constant support of them grieving together.
The thing is that, as cliche as we always say, we grieve differently. You know, we can go through as siblings. We can lose a sibling. However, how we grieve our sibling, it's okay for us to grieve differently based on our relationship when our sister or our brother was still alive. So, like I said, if obviously one sibling was closer to the other, they will struggle the most. But just because the other one was not that close to the other, it does not mean they are, at the same time, they're struggling the least. So what I'm saying is that grief has no manual. And unfortunately, there is no thing of, because this one was closer to this one, you know, and this one was not. There is no manual. As long as we allow ourselves to grieve the person in their absence, the same manner that we had that relationship with them whilst they were still alive. So someone can post the whole year on WhatsApp, for instance. 2 years, someone can just start a new course. They can register and pour all their sorrows and grief and pain onto books. Someone will fail at the end of the year because they are struggling to adapt or adjust with the loss. Because remember, mostly grief, the symptoms are similar to depression. You struggle to sleep, you struggle to eat, all of that. And some people, when they are depressed, they find something to focus on. For instance, if it's grief, they will have a picture that they look at every day, or they'll have a sort of a ritual or a routine that they have to grieve. Someone will just be literally paralyzed emotionally, psychologically, that they struggle to do anything. The important thing, again, is that we need to allow people to grieve as and how they want to.
Yeah.
Because even if you see that someone is not coping, even if you say, but there's a psychologist, there's a church, there's someone you can talk to, if they are not ready for that, now it becomes as if we are imposing or projecting our own stuff onto them to say, go look for a psychologist, go speak to someone. But when we allow them to grieve as and how they want, it's still enough.
All right, Julia, we'll have to leave this conversation there. We've run out of time. I think one of the worst things about this grieving process is that even when you've lost someone and your world is falling apart, life still needs to continue.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate part. And it's not easy to move on. That's why you need probably a community, but also that intervention that Julia was speaking about, that maybe speak to someone professional about it.
Absolutely. That is Julia Mathabathe, a clinical psychologist. Thank you so much for your time and for helping us unpack this very heartfelt conversation.